I will say that the U.S. culture, my understanding is a little more conversant in this kind of language, but I'm going to give it a go and see if you can come on board with this one. Here's the way we're going to ask the next question. Are my psychological wounds undermining my leadership? Are my psychological wounds undermining my leadership? Okay, here we go. Psychobabble time. Okay? I mean, people in the States used to get all nervous about this. I think we've grown a little bit now. I don't know how Australia is about it. But here's the truth. This might come as a, real moment of truth for all of you here. But I can say it quite directly. You did not grow up with a perfect father. Your dad was not a perfect man. Was not a perfect father to you. Your mother, well, let's talk about your mother. Your mother wasn't a perfect mother, okay? You all grew up in imperfect homes. With a group this size, some of you were emotionally neglected. Some of you came from large families and parents just didn't really have enough time to pour into you the way your heart needed it to happen. In a crowd this size, some of you were emotionally abused, physically abused, or sexually abused. It's just, we live in a depraved world, so some of you are that way. Now, granted, not all of you are horribly wounded. If this is the level of consciousness, like you make decisions on this plane and above, there is a story going on under the veneer of your consciousness. Now, here's the truth about some of you. Some of you only got little wounds. Like your diapers were too tight. Okay? Your 8th birthday party was not all you dreamed it was going to be, okay? Those are just little nicks, little wounds, okay? There are others of you that have great big gaping wounds from terrible stuff that happened. That sometimes you've never reflected on it. In some cases, you've never talked to anybody about it. Here's the question I'm asking you to reflect on. Are the decisions you're making as a leader above the line of consciousness here, are they at all tethered to or affected by some of these wounds that are still unresolved in your life? Now, let me give you some examples to bring this to life. There's a pastor right now in the church in the U.S., and all the time he was growing up, his father said to him, "You are a stupid little boy. I mean, you got no brains, you have no good sense. You're never going to amount to anything," etc., etc. Okay? Grows up, he becomes a Christian. He feels called into the pastorate. I've known the guy for 20-some years. His church is on a never-ending quest for the bigger than, better than, greater than, whatever. I mean, this guy has a case of grandiosity that is so obvious to most people. He doesn't see it himself. But he's got his church right now in about $30 million of debt. They build stuff they can't afford. They hired staff they can't afford. They got the latest, greatest tech stuff and computer stuff. This guy has a case of grandiosity that's shocking. Members of his church get tired out and leave the church. And as they're leaving the church, they shake their heads and they're saying, "Who is he trying to impress?" I ask you who he's trying to impress. He's still trying to impress his dad. He is totally unaware that all this grandiosity, all these decisions up here, is really being driven by unresolved junk with his dad. And when he builds another building and adds another wing to this department or that, he's saying, see, Dad, you're wrong." My prediction is that's gonna terrorize his leadership to the day he dies, unless he dips down beneath the level of the veneer. And he says, "I've got some psychological wounds that are driving some things above the level here that I got to pay attention to." if he ever really resolved this issue with his dad and then brought a little sober-minded decision-making to his church, they would heave a sigh of relief and say, thank God, I think now he's mainly just trying to please God. It would change his leadership. I know another guy who, when he was growing up, his family was out, he lived in a family that was out of control. His dad was running around and gone half the time. His mom, while his dad was out, his mom was in immoral relationships, didn't come home some nights, brothers and sisters on drugs. The whole family was out of control, okay? So he gets saved. He's the pastor of a church in the U.S., highest control pastor I know. You don't sneeze without his permission. I mean, he will not let anybody do anything. He holds on to everything in that church with an iron grip. So capable people come along, they say, would you share a little ministry? He slaps his hand, they leave the church. What is driving this maniacal level of control up here? It's stuff down beneath the level of the veneer. He's never dealt with growing up with a family out of control. Okay? Now let's bring it a little more personally. Early 90s, some loving staff members come to me and they say, Bill, some of the fuel that's providing the energy for your rocket, some fuel you're burning it ain't all Holy Spirit fuel. I said, what? They said, man, there's an energy in you. I mean, you overcommit. You run too fast. You're near the point of exhaustion a good deal of the time. You bite off more than you can chew. We don't think the Holy Spirit's asking you to lead and live like this. We think there's something else fueling you and driving you. And I went, I grew up in a Christian family. There's nothing beneath this line I need to look at. Okay? So they say very lovingly, we're asking you to go see a counselor. Can you imagine me walking into a shrink's office? So I go in, first thing the guy wants is $100. And I'm, like, you better be good, man. You better straighten out my world in one session. Anyway, we get into one of these sessions, and the counselor says, I'd like for you to describe a time when your mother touched your soul. I said, define touch your soul. You know what he says? I shouldn't have to. I go, oh boy, okay. This is going to be expensive, I can tell. All right. So we work on this for a long time. I mean, weeks and weeks and weeks. Now, I got an older brother who is just, believe me, he's a very uncomplicated individual. He kind of rebelled in high school and did the whole beer drinking party scene, and he's straightened out now and flies straight. But he's just an uncomplicated, fun-loving guy and all that. So one night we're sitting in a lounge, and I say, Dan, can I talk to you about something really personal? He's, I'm his younger brother. He says, go ahead, Billy. I said, well, I'm seeing this counselor. And he asked me, we're working on, like, whether or not Mom ever touched my soul. And he says, you're paying money for that? He said, heck no, she never touched our soul. Golly. You're supposed to be the bright one in our family, And I said, no kidding. I said, this is undoing me on the end. He was like, oh man, grow up. He said, no one ever touched hers. And it cost me like $5,000 to get all that. And really, no one had ever touched her soul. I don't have a single memory of her ever expressing affection or tucking me in bed or saying she loved me or anything. She's a wonderful person, by the way. Just completely incapable of doing the appropriate kind of emotional nurturing that my heart needed. And, you know, my dad did a little better, actually, than my mom in that department, but he was gone a lot of the time. So I'm doing all this, you know, below-the-line work. I'm really trying to figure out, because I've got people who love me saying that there's some bad fuel in my rocket. So one day, in this counseling deal, we get into some very sensitive territory. And I'm not going to get into the likes of you, but I paid too much money to like give it away so easily. But I actually finally, after many, many months, I figured out where I was and the specific episode with my parents where I decided I was not going to be loved for just showing up. I was going to have to try to earn it. And I actually did a flip of the switch where I said, I'm not going to get love for just showing up around this family. I had 5 kids in the family. And I said, but if I achieve, maybe I'll get loved. I mean, I could take you to where I was standing and what the circumstances were. So I just started achieving. And I achieved academically, you know, honor roll and all this other stuff. And then I achieved athletically, and I achieved extracurricularly. And, you know, I was just like an achievement maniac. Well, then I become a Christian. And the first thing I do is I flip over and I say, God ain't going to love me for just showing up. I'm going to achieve to earn his love in the kingdom. So I'm on this achievement treadmill. So if God would be pleased with a church of 500, God, he'd be thrilled with a church of 1,000. Man, if God would be thrilled with a church of 1,000, he'd be ecstatic over a church of 5,000, or you see what I mean? And I'm like in this exhausting treadmill of achievement until it all comes crashing down, till I overachieve myself into total mental exhaustion. And then I got to deal with something below the line. So I do a lot of work in that area, a lot of work, and face some unbelievably painful stuff. I mean, yeah, just very painful stuff. And have a lot of painful conversations. And my dad had already died at that point, so I couldn't really resolve that with him in a conversation. I had some of these just awful conversations with my mother, who I have a good relationship with now, but there's still not an emotional, soul-touching thing. She never had hers touched. So I had to resolve all that, and then in later years, I mean, mid-90s on, those who know me well and love me most, they say to me pretty much these days, they say, most of the fuel that your rocket burns on seems like Holy Spirit fuel. Occasionally, they'll see me flip into some achievement stuff, and then they'll go, hey, Bill, do you really want to be doing that? Is that good fuel, bad fuel? What do you think? I'll go, well, let me check below the line here, and I'll get back to you. We do a level of community in our church at the top leadership levels where we know each other's junk. In the top circles, elders, board, and staff, we know each other's junk pretty well. And when we see suspect decisions being made up here, we just say, hey, you know what, is that tethered to something? Is there something below the line there that's driving this? Because if it is, let's deal with it below the line so it doesn't screw up your sober judgment above the line. Okay, now here's the big deal. And this, you know, I don't know what to do with this other than to say, the person who is currently sitting in your chair has to do this work. You have to do this work. It's what self-leadership requires. Everyone you lead is being affected by this. Every single decision you make is being affected by below-the-line stuff. So you either do the work and resolve the below-the-line stuff, or you subject people that you lead to decisions that they will wonder about and often worry about and quite frequently shake their heads about and occasionally leave your ministry over. They'll just go, golly, if that guy is so dense, if that woman is so sparse that she doesn't realize she's all jacked out of shape by something's driving her. Well, I can't stay under this leadership. Nobody can do that work but you. Might I add that it's a pretty loving thing to discern the possibility of this, and when you've earned the relational right to gently ask someone who's doing a lot of screwy stuff up here, it's okay to say, can I have a private conversation with you? And if you want to cut me off at the pass, I will allow you to cut me off at the pass. It's okay, but I would just like to say I've seen a pattern of this or that or this or that, and I wonder if it might be connected to something in your background that you haven't looked at. Can we talk about that? And that's what got me to a place. I mean, I just had loving friends who loved me too much to let me continue to do that zany kind of behavior. And I'm forever grateful for them pushing me below the line. My, it's quiet in here. Well, let's just move on then. It's the quickest